Hey everyone! I was originally hoping to give you a quick update on some things with the Stop Killing Games campaign, but I ended up having to redo this 3 or 4 times based on what I've learned. So as of right now, I and everyone helping me are lost in a legal maze. But I think we're pretty close to the exit, and we can do a lot of damage if we can figure a way out of this. I'll explain everything. But first things first, the Australian petition to Stop Killing Games is up, and that has a deadline, May 20th. So if you're a citizen or resident of Australia, go and sign it. There was some miscommunication on the language used in it. That was a fumble, but we can get it back on track as I understand it. Just go and sign it. Canada! The Canadian petition has just opened. Finally! Go sign it if you're Canadian or live in Canada. Brazil! In Brazil, the lawsuit is looking more likely it will happen, but we need more information. Specifically, we're trying to figure out how many people owned a copy of The Crew. Here's some instructions in Portuguese. This has also been added to StopKillingGames.com. Okay, on to what this video is about. As a refresher, part of this campaign is we're petitioning the UK government to stop the destruction of video games when support ends. And wouldn't you know it, that petition has finally opened up. Here's a link. Go and sign it if you're eligible. And not only has it opened, but we've since cleared our first hurdle and have gotten a direct response from government. And its response, it's like a puzzle box that I think even the people who wrote it don't realize what they've done. It looks like a useless non-answer at first glance, and it mostly is, but oh man, there is some meat hidden away in there too. This gets confusing. I'll explain it the best I can. But even if I get something wrong, I'll make it very easy to point out where I got it wrong. So I'm just going to go through the government's entire response here and explain what it means. If that sounds like pure torture to you, I completely understand. You don't need to watch this. In that case, all I have to say is if you're a UK resident or citizen, check back on StopKillingGames.com in a week or two. We may have a very potent option opening up. We'll see. Alright, for everybody still here, let's go through the UK government's official reply to the issue of publishers destroying video games they sold you. Let's look at the first blurb here. Those selling games must provide clear information and continued access to games if sold on the understanding they will remain playable indefinitely. Alright, now while this petition is about almost all online video games, I'm going to use the situation going on with The Crew as an example of a test study. So let's look at The Crew's end-user license agreement. You and Ubisoft, or its licensors, may terminate this EULA at any time for any reason. So Ubisoft is not saying it can remain playable indefinitely. They're saying you have no guarantees on how long the game will last whatsoever. Now what's debatable is if that's clear to the average customer, since this is buried in the fine print and the box cover only says requires internet, or sometimes it doesn't even say that on the front cover. But I think that doesn't really matter. I've made this point before, but anything less than saying exactly when the game will cease functioning isn't enough. The majority of customers won't notice it otherwise. But see, this is also a rough position to argue, because the government could just say, nah, this is plenty. The customer is informed, and call it a day. It's a subjective interpretation in an industry with lots of money behind it. That gives us a huge disadvantage. So there is an argument to make here, but this is not a slam dunk at all. In my opinion, this is too shaky a foundation and probably not worth pursuing. So let's keep moving. Okay, this is a bad sign. Right away, they're saying no to a question we weren't even asking. Now, while the issue of having access to old versions of software is one I'm sympathetic to, that's an issue I can kind of see both sides, so that's way too muddy for me to get involved with. And again, we weren't even asking for this in the petition. This paragraph there's a lot to say on, but I want to skip it for now. We'll come back to it. Except this part. This is a repeat of what we just went over. It's subjective and the odds will be stacked against us. This part tells us where to report the problem, except not really because this is more complicated than that. This paragraph is useless regarding what we're asking for, and they feel the need to double down saying supporting old software is expensive. I guess good thing we were asking for publishers to patch their games so they can end support whenever they want. This paragraph, oh boy. This one may sound good at first glance, but what it means in, first off, our example of the Crew, Ubisoft is going to refuse to repair it. So that's already out the window. And according to someone helping me with this who understood the Consumer Rights Act of 2015 better than I did, what this probably means is if you file all the paperwork, then Ubisoft, in this case, would give you a free game of their choosing. Now, while some form of compensation to the individual is a good thing, that doesn't save the game from being destroyed, and it's only a small minority of people who are going to jump through all the hoops and act on this. So following this advice is not going to discourage companies from killing games in any meaningful way. This paragraph is saying it all depends on the contract, and of course they always say they can do anything. However, that does not override statutory consumer rights in the UK. And the last paragraph, goods not of the standard which a reasonable person would consider to be satisfactory. Now this is actually a dead end, I think. Again, people more skilled in UK law explain this to me. They're talking about what a reasonable time for the developer to keep supporting it is. Well, I don't care about that. So what if a game is destroyed after 6 years instead of 2? They're both dead, and that's the only metric I'm looking at. If the game is destroyed forever. And the law doesn't even address that. So this is a red herring. Yeah, best I can tell, there is nothing concrete in UK law to prevent a company from destroying a game that they sold to you. But I think we can still do something in a roundabout way. Oh, and in the last part of this, we're getting a flawed comparison to support for a phone ending. Yes, that would be a fair analogy if literally all phones sold by the manufacturer permanently stopped working the second support ended. I don't know if the person who wrote this literally doesn't understand why video games are different from phones, or if they're intentionally being obtuse. I kind of hope it's the first option, but either one is very bad. So yeah, overall this response from government is pretty terrible. Except for that part that we skipped. Now let's back it up. Here, these are the only lines that really matter in all of this. The CPRs require information to consumers to be clear and correct, and prohibit commercial practices which through false information or misleading omissions cause the average consumer to make a different choice. For example, to purchase goods or services they would not otherwise have purchased. The regulations prohibit commercial practices which omit or hide information which the average consumer needs to make an informed choice. Information the consumer needs to make an informed choice. You mean like when a game is going to shut down? Most games are sold on perpetual licenses, so this doesn't apply to them. But games with an online dependency do shut down, and there are no standards at all in the industry. The Culling 2 lasted 8 days. Guild Wars has been operating for 19 years and is still going. That's kind of a big spread. I'd say customers need to know how long that service period is in order to make a good decision. Now, in fairness, the Culling 2 refunded everybody. But what about Lawbreakers? That lasted 1 year. I don't think they refunded anyone. And better yet, for games like The Crew, they made deals with record labels and car manufacturers to use their brands. And according to Ubisoft itself, those licenses expired. Now, I think that's highly misleading as to why people can no longer play the game, but fine, let's take them at their word. Well, in that case, Ubisoft knew when those licenses expired, back in 2014 at the latest, but they didn't inform the customer about that until 9 years later. So they were quite obviously withholding relevant information from the customer that would have affected their purchase decision. Anyway, the point is, this is our clear violation from the industry. Forget The Crew. I want to say 99.9% of all games that require an internet connection never tell you how long they'll last when you buy them. They usually only tell you that about 3 months before they shut down. If a customer doesn't know if their game is going to last 1 year or 19 and counting, how can they be informed? That's just gambling then. If I sold you a warranty for, I don't know, a car engine, would it be cool if I said I won't tell you how long the warranty lasts, just that it can expire at any time? You can't tell me that's not relevant information for the customer to know. So as I read this, it is totally legal for publishers to destroy your games in the UK. That sucks. But according to the government itself, and more specifically, Section 6.1 of the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, it is not legal for companies to not tell you when they're going to shut down your game when you buy it. And if you play video games, you know that's the case with almost every single company that sells online games. This is how we can do something in the UK. Now granted, this is not as good as penalizing companies for destroying your games directly, but it may take us to the same place, because companies do not want to tell you when your games will expire. Because if the average customer knows their game is going to die, and exactly when, that will undoubtedly hurt sales. My theory is companies will do anything to not have to put a label like this on their games. It would depress sales and create a permanent reminder of what the customer is losing. This is hugely psychological. It would make more financial sense for a company to have an end-of-life plan for a game than be forced to have this label. So, we have an angle we can hit the industry on in the UK. That's good, right? Well, maybe. See, the part we're all getting hung up on is how to report this to the UK government. Some volunteers think reporting to trading standards is the way to go on this. But after that, it gets complicated. First off, Trading Standards' website is only open on the weekends. And yes, you heard me correctly. That's minor though, we can work with that. Out of all the crap I've had to deal with on this campaign, that's towards the bottom of the list. The problem is in another line in that reply, which actually is kind of relevant. Maybe. The CRA has a time limit of up to 6 years after a breach of contract during which a consumer can take legal action. And this is where we all got completely lost, and to be honest, we need a UK legal expert at this point. I'm just gonna list off everything I'm confused about here. Does this mean 6 years after the game shut down, or 6 years after the date of purchase? If it's 6 years from the date of purchase, is simply filing a complaint that we're not given an expiration date when the game ends enough? Or is that considered too trivial without also being accompanied by a game shutdown? Like in the case of The Crew, we might be screwed because the gap between the two is potentially longer than 6 years. Does that 6-year time limit even matter, since that's referring to the CRA and the part we're concerned with is the CPR? What are the possible penalties from this? I'm not going to ask people to act on this if the only consequences are a £500 fine on a company worth billions. What the hell do we do about Scotland? According to people helping on this, those 2008 regulations don't apply there. If you're familiar with UK law and think you can answer these questions, please email me. If it looks like we can report the industry on this, we'll try and get a guide set up as soon as we can on StopKillingGames.com to act on this. And depending on what the answers are, it's possible most of the crew may be exempt. But maybe every single online-only game sold in the past 6 years qualifies. In that case, oh god, is it going to be a lot of work making the guides? Then you could report violations for days. Or on the weekends anyway. I mean, that's the issue. This violation is so widespread, I honestly don't know how to handle this. It's kind of frustrating that we have to play lawyer to find the exact violation the industry is doing, figure out how and where to report it, and who is qualified to report it, try to explain the problem to government, and then try to convince government to do its job. I mean, my god, this is self-checkout law enforcement. And I want to keep it real. It's possible this may still fail in the UK, but I want to try so hard to make them own it if so. Here are the possibilities as I see them. The UK enforces the law, and online games will need an end-of-life plan or have to start labeling when they'll expire. Not the best win, but still a massive win. The UK ignores all violation reports or refuses to enforce the law. Also a possibility. The UK passive-aggressively refuses to enforce the law, either by having an inconsequential penalty or by saying the date of when online games will expire is not information that would affect consumer purchases. I mean, that would just be incorrect and go against common sense. But if a judge is on the take and says that, then yeah, they're the judge. Then we'll know exactly where we stand instead of tiptoeing around this issue at every juncture like we are right now. Oh yeah, and the petition hits 100K and new law is passed on this in Parliament. Yeah, I probably wouldn't hold my breath on that one, but I'm not British enough to know if that's impossible or not. And it may not matter. With this statement, we have ammunition now. I mean, either way, let's get more signatures. We still have time. We don't need to haul ass like Australia does. I mean, who knows what will happen if we clear 100K? We cleared 10K and got all but a confirmation of what the games industry is doing is illegal. Now, technically, we didn't even need a petition for that. But nobody I know was casually reading Section 6.1 of the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. So hey, whatever gets us to the finish line. Maybe 100K in itself won't do much, but it will cause something else helpful to emerge that we didn't know about beforehand. That's happened a couple times in this campaign. But yeah, this entire experience is a good reminder of what an uphill battle this all is. Though seeing the government say something is not legal that the industry is doing every day sure feels like it could be the start of a win, we're getting closer to something.